Zach. Thank you, Jana, and of course Michael and Carlos. So I'm happy to be the last because I realized the more I was working on this, the more I realized that I'm looking more and more at contemporary echoes of this poetics. Although, of course, my root, my beginnings as a scholar are really in the 20th century, modernism. So much of my time and so many of my years were spent thinking about World War I and of course World War II. So I just want to show a few things. I want to tell you very briefly what it is that is going to happen. This show and tell might not happen. So what's going to happen is the following. I will give you just a sense of what it is that I would like to discuss if I had more time. So this is going to be a very quick overview. I find Ramazani's attention to the building of imaginative solidarity in World War I poetry particularly significant in contemporary poetic practices. I cannot detach from that. I'm actually teaching and then thinking about the contemporary Black poetics, radical poetics. So there is so much that I could say, I could go in this way, but I would like to stay on topic. I also believe that all of us gathered today are indeed working and invested as scholars and educators and citizens in the work of actualizing in small or larger measures what Paul Gilroy, cited by Ramazani's term, the Bible planetary humanism. I think it really is our work, all of us here. And I'm also very interested in cosmopolitan solidarity. I realize as Michael was presenting that indeed all the appalled writers have been working on throughout the years. So writers with no nationalities, writers that transcended the very idea of having a nationality or having a city or in a place. So Tristan Tzara. I will put in this list Boccioni, although I know it's problematic, the futurists were very appalled beings and all the others, of course. They were appalled beings in so many ways. They were migrant intellectuals. Vernon Lee, whom I, recently, and also recently, like Nina Loy, H.D., and Laura Riding, of course, they were all working along lines of solidarity because they were really class-based. There was no solidarity outside. For example, Laura Riding had absolutely no solidarities with the working classes. So that was, but she was an appalled, and she was an anarchist, and she was a pacifist. All these writers. So Vernon Lee, a great example of class-based cosmopolitan solidarities. But to stay in theme again, to go back, I would like to then discuss, present quite boldly the idea that indeed the role of crepuscular aesthetics, and eventually out of crepuscular aesthetics, discuss a little bit of the role of the fragmented body in avant-garde writing, and perhaps arrive at Tristan Tzara's splendid example of a play of fragmented body that is actually a play that presents a more useful kind of fragmentation. So it's no longer the traumatic fragmentation that you will find, and I brought a few examples of the traumatic fragmentation you find in World War I. And no longer the traumatic fragmentation of indeed the reports or what we call nowadays the post-traumatic stress syndrome, the reports of war, that is transmitted to us through the work of, through the poetics of Artaud and the poetics of Sarah Kane and the poetics of brutalism before Sarah Kane, and then the poetics of Sarah Kane and the poetics of Howard Barker of his a theater of the catastrophe. I realized this is not poetry, this is theater. That's the other problem that I work on poetry, and also I love avant-garde theater, but of course. So there is all of that, but that is a different kind of fragmentation, the Tzara fragmentation. It's an appalled fragmentation, it's an overcoming of the sense of the body, Morcellet as traumatic body. So that is something that your article got me thinking truly, because there is affect, there is sympathy in Tzara, there always is. And so let's see if I can get to that. First, the most bold thing that I have to say, that I would like to perhaps to propose that we look at the poetry of World War I and the cosmopolitan sympathies of the poetry of World War I through the lenses of Italian crepuscolarism. So now that I'm here in the company of, of colleagues who are actually, working on different, across the Atlantic, this way and the other, I could finally, say, okay, this is my ultimate thing, Italian, of course, Italian aesthetics, necessary. So, crepuscularism, that it literally means the twilight school. It's a group of early, it's the term that gathers a group of early 20th century Italian poets whose work was characterized by disillusion, nostalgia, taste for simple things, and direct and adorned style. Like Futurism, which was contemporaneous movement with crepuscularism. Crepuscularism reflected the influence of European decadence, was a reaction to the florid ornamental rhetoric of the Gabriele D'Annunzio in particular, and also to the machismo and the militarism of D'Annunzio. So it completely differed from the militant futurist movement, and because it really accentuated an interest in passivity, boredom, loneliness, and and the tedium of anonymity in the city. So there is affect. There is a cosmopolitan affect just for the simple fact of being modern. It's the being modern is the being, and that is really at war, at stake here. So the movement died in the second decade of the 20th century, but it was, of course, a very important influence altogether. And indeed, the crepuscular aesthetics was born, I should backtrack, so born in 1899, more or less, and we can say that it died perhaps around the mid-20s, and I do consider, for example, that Eugenio Montale's Cuttlefish Bones is really one last example of crepuscularism that has begun to merge with Hermeticism, or has begun to completely bring to fruition both. So the movement, why is so interesting? Because this, I go back to the metaphor of crepuscolare, the twilight. The crepuscularism really evokes Nietzsche's The Twilight of the Idols, and it's really evoked in the term twilight, the crepuscolare, or crepuscolo, is the moment of ombra and shadow. It's linked to melancholia traditionally, all the way down to the Middle Ages and even before. So there is this link. It's profoundly, it's philological, it's cultural, sociological, and all that. And the crepuscolari were both Nietzsche and anti-Nietzschean, also poets of the first half of the 20th century. The decline that they experience is indeed brought upon us or them by modernization, and it's also the decline that is brought upon us by the rule of instrumental reason. It's a decline. So in this sense, you can say that the crepuscular anti-Nietzschean / anti-Nietzschean slant continues into the thought of the left Hegelians. So it's truly interesting for us as a cauldron of possibilities. And so this is why we're in decline, because of modernization, because of instrumental reason. And the solution is, the solution is not in the bold individual action of the heroic, because ethical values are so confused and so morally bankrupt that indeed there is no propulsion towards individual heroism. And this is truly the internal, this is the empathy and the sympathy of soldiers that are forced to die without any sense of any investment. So I could read at this point the opening of Ossi di Seppia, that is, of course, the moment where instrumental reason is denounced once and forever, but I will not do that because there is no time. So I will just very briefly say the hysterical crepuscularism, so everybody who recognized, truly the question of sympathy in here, occupies really, it's all about the modest and the ordinary and the banal, and the minimal movements of the experience. And even if you're in the trenches, this is what you get. It's the banal of death. It's the banal of carnage. It's the banal of suffering. And it's a common banal, of course. And indeed, it is an hysterical the defeated, as I said, and the liminal, of borders extinction. It's an extinction that is sociological, there is historical, there is an experiential extinction, like the literal extinction. So all these are themes, really, they run throughout the World War I war poetry. Poetry then becomes an intimate public discourse in crepuscularism. Of course, a discourse that occupies this liminal space, the space of the shadow, and then in fact this sympathy for the night, for the shadow, for umbra remains constant from the early modernist thought throughout. The surrealist is taken up very significantly, I think, by black thought in the 60s. It has to be umbra, it has to be the liminal, it has to be that common sense that one is bordering extinction. I just really wanted to talk very briefly about the fact that in some ways when I think of Philip Larkin, I think of somebody who's really continuing crepuscularism and going into the 60s and perhaps the ultimate late crepuscular poet, sinister at times for his episodic lack of sympathy that probably descends from the less sympathetic qualities of William Lewis, who was like the least sympathetic, early 20th century poet. So Hermeticism and the fragmentation of the Dadaist and Vorticist and Cubist begins indeed with, so the crepuscular aesthetic is attentive to the body, attentive to the really minimal variations of the experience, and the experience is always deeply, deeply embodied. Tedium is a fact of embodiment. It's as heavy as the body is. Fragmentation of the Dadaist and the Vorticist and the Cubist and later, of course, the Surrealist fragmentation and so on and so forth, that really begins also with the actual experience of the body and the mutilated bodies of World War I. All these aesthetics assume that the subject is a fragmented body or a corps morcelé, and assume that indeed subjectivity is a field of discrete parts, because as such is experience. Hermeticism then gives us more sharp fragments of being, not necessarily epiphanic or revelatory, not necessarily visionary. I mentioned Hermeticism because it's the next logical step, so to speak, of crepuscularism in terms of just the history of poetics. The part stands by itself, parts of the body stands by itself, part of the experience and body experience stands by itself, discrete parts, and it is as much as a severed limb that is left in the battlefield. And this is a way to read Hermetic poetry that I want to propose. And I also want to propose a little bridge to today. Leslie Scalopino, for me, I read her as a contemporary Hermetic poet whose battlefield was both the urban landscape of poverty. She has fantastic work on urban landscape and poverty, as well as, of course, the psychological landscape of discrete parts. And indeed, in this book of hers, I absolutely love, not so early, mid-period perhaps, The Front Matter, she writes, quote, "The compression of the real into one's waking state, streaming clearly in the midst of its form," unquote. This is, an example of contemporary Hermeticism. So, crepuscular poets were stunned by the war. Should I stop? No, that's hard.
I mean, yeah, we've got within 15 minutes that we can all talk together.
So I should stop. And then from here, I will stop. Can I say one last thing? That the crepuscular poets were stunned by the war, shocked and silenced by the war. They were indeed stunned by what Ramazani writes when he writes about Robert Service, that they're stunned by the oddity of people killing their likeness. This completely stunned them. And from this point onward, I would have moved and show you a little bit of the Gasthardt, the good fragmentation. It's an avant-garde play where there are no characters. There are only little pieces: mouth, eyes, ear, nose, eyebrow, neck, and they all have kind of fun, but they all protect themselves from the traumatic memory of the war. And